Alright, here we're going to make a quick how-to video of how to solder wires together properly. Basically, don't even attempt to solder if you don't have flux. If you don't have flux, your solder ain't going to flow. You'll never end up with a solid connection, and it's just about pointless. You might as well wrap them together and put tape around them, because solder does not flow without flux. So please do not even try it, because it's just going to end up in a giant ball and you're going to be pissed off, and that's not going to work right. So to solder properly, you have two clean, non-corroded copper wires. The way I like to put them together is like this. That way now they're twisted together like so, and that gives me the longest point to work with while soldering. Then you want to take a little bit of flux. Apply it all over the copper you're going to be soldering, or aluminum if it's tinsel leads for a subwoofer or something. But if it's aluminum for tinsel leads, even though the aluminum may look clean, you're definitely going to want to go over it and make sure that it is absolutely clean, because aluminum tinsel leads are a lot harder to solder than copper, especially if you're trying to solder copper to aluminum tinsel leads. And that's a little more advanced. But now you have a good amount of flux on the copper you're going to solder, so now your solder should flow fine. Personally, I just cut a little bit off of a roll. I use thin PC solder. That's the solder I'm using. Yeah, it's made in China. You know, everything's made in China, so. Pretty much when I solder, my solder never actually touches the soldering gun. I more or less just heat up the copper itself, allowing the flux to flow, and then right next to the tip of the soldering pencil, after it heats up, Simple as that. Now you have a 100% solid soldered connection that's never going to break. Now you can go right over top of it with a piece of heat shrink, use a hair dryer, use a heat gun, use a lighter, whatever you want to shrink the heat shrink over it, and you're good to go. I mean, that's, like I said, without flux, you are never going to solder correctly. The solder will not flow through the strands of wire without flux. It will simply ball up. You'll never get a good connection. It'll never look like that. But it's, you know, it's not very hard. Like I said, my solder basically never even touches, you know, the tip of the soldering iron. I just place the solder right next to the soldering iron after the copper's heated up or the aluminum's heated up if you're soldering aluminum wire. Whatever the case may be, you get the material hot enough. Once the flux is on, the flux will flow through the material, and then you add in the solder little by little, and it just flows directly through, and you end up with that. You end up with a quality, well, you know, very high quality soldered wire that you don't have to worry about coming apart. You know, I recommend doing this for your radio connections whenever you're hooking up your wiring harness for your aftermarket head unit. If you have direct leads on your subwoofers, personally, I like to extend them by doing something similar. That way I don't have a bunch of broken connections in between by having a speaker terminal with a ring terminal and then another connection on the other side. I like to run directly from the subwoofer to the amp. It's the most optimal way. Using, you know, speaker terminals and stuff, no, it doesn't add a lot of resistance. It's not a deal breaker if you do, but I don't want to add any resistance at all, so I like to go directly from the subwoofer to the amplifier. But like I said, it's not hard to solder as long as you have the correct material. You start with clean wire. You start with actual flux. That's the most important part. I can't stress that. Without flux, you ain't soldering. And you don't want to try to use real thick solder, obviously. You know, you want something real thin in diameter. This is most commonly referred to as PC solder. In particular, this diameter is 0.6 millimeters. There's a little bit thinner, there's, you know, a little bit thicker that you can use, but this is about what I use every time, whether I'm soldering wires, whether I'm fixing a solder joint on an amplifier. You know, that's pretty much my go-to stuff. Hopefully this helps you, you know, correctly solder wires together. Best of luck to you. Thanks for watching.